Hey guys, welcome back. It's Missy, and today we're going to be talking about coping mechanisms that you've developed in childhood that are now keeping you stuck. So when you grow up in dysfunctional environments, you no longer have an environment where you can thrive and where you can learn and grow like other children. Now you're in constant survival mode. So instead of getting to be a worry-free child that gets to play and gets to go and, hang out with their friends, or gets to, kind of explore the world, you now are put in a position where you have to learn coping mechanisms in order to deal with all of the chaos that you're enduring. And so it's not just like you have these coping mechanisms in childhood and they just stay there. No, you then go on to develop them and take them on with you into adulthood, and you deal with the world the same way you dealt with it in childhood. And these things aren't bad. Don't think of them as inherently bad. It's that you held on to these things because it helped you to be able to cope and survive all this time. Now it's a matter of learning, okay, these things no matter suit me, they actually are hurting me in adulthood because I'm not in that toxic environment anymore. I've grown up, I'm an adult. So what happens is that these coping mechanisms, although they were helpful back then, they're keeping you stuck in that trauma response, and they're keeping you stuck in that negative feedback loop of feeling like you have to survive in order to be okay. So that's why we want to learn these things, and then when you learn how to get out of these things, or you learn to be able to identify these coping mechanisms and you learn how to get out of them, then you no longer will feel yourself staying stuck. So the first one is worrying. Now, people see worrying as something that's so negative, but it's not that it's inherently negative. It actually has been a helpful tool that your brain has used in order to deal with all of the chaos like I had mentioned. So worrying is actually your brain's way of trying to gain clarity and control in situations. It's a way to give yourself answers. So in childhood, when you knew that your mom or dad was upset, if you worried about the repercussions, it helped you to kind of come up with a plan of, what can you do in these situations in order to deal with, your mom or dad being so chaotic and unpredictable. So let's say you recognize that they're stomping. That worrying is, oh no, are they upset? What do I have to do to deal with this stomping? I know that it can result in this negative thing. And so then you start to worry about, hearing their stomping. And then it helps you to come up with a plan. But worrying is actually counterintuitive when you're older, because now worrying gets in the way, because you don't need to worry like that anymore. Again, you're not that helpless child. You know how to deal with situations. You can take hold of situations. You don't rely on an adult. You are the adult now. So it's so important when it comes to worrying for you to identify when you're worrying. And some people, they need a worrying time where they just take a part of their day and they just 15-30 minutes, they just allow worrying to come out, because that's just what they need. That helps them to be able to not feel like they're repressing it or suppressing it. It's a way to let their mind wander. And then after that, it's so important to be like, okay, mind, you worried. No more worrying. It's time to focus on the present. It's time to focus on other things. And that's how you retrain your brain, so that way you're not a worrier 24/7. You can still, it's okay to be concerned about things and kind of think about things and think things through, especially if that gives you some sort of comfort. But it's important that you're selective and you don't allow it to take over your whole day, and you don't allow it to come up every time there's a situation. You need to learn how to cope with situations in a healthier way and know when to let go of control and when to take on control. What is in your control, what's out of your control, what can you influence and what can you not influence. And the more you focus on that, the less you'll feel like you need to worry, because you're the adult now. You're not that helpless child, and you know which situations you can let go of and which situations you know to take on. The next one is avoiding feelings. So in childhood, you most likely felt like you couldn't have feelings. You felt you were punished for having feelings. You dealt with shame for having feelings. There's just a negative connotation to having feelings. You didn't feel like you were allowed to have them. And so it felt dangerous to have feelings. You didn't learn how to cope with uncomfortable or negative emotions. And so instead, you learned, okay, I need to rid my emotions. I need to repress them. I need to suppress them. I need to make sure that I do not pay attention to these emotions, so that way I don't deal with the negative consequences of having these emotions. And this especially happens because you didn't learn how to cope with your emotions. Your parents are supposed to be the ones that helps you to regulate your emotions. So if you're not taught how to regulate your emotions, and you're taught there's something to stay away from, they're bad, or there's a consequence for having these emotions, you then are like, okay, I shouldn't have these emotions altogether. They're bad, they're negative, I don't want to be a negative influence on other people, or I don't want to ruin people's day, or I know that, you know, I may be in trouble, or I'll lose, or I'll be abandoned if I have these emotions, which often there could be that fear of abandonment of like, if I'm negative or I have these emotions, I will be abandoned. And that's what you felt in childhood, is that, and you had to abandon yourself so your parents didn't abandon you, even if it's just emotionally, feeling like your parents didn't emotionally abandon you. Instead, in order to get unstuck, you have to just let your emotions run its course. Emotions really go through a cycle. You know, they come, you feel them, you let them pass, you self-soothe, you love yourself, you nurture yourself, and then you feel better. And then those emotions will come again, and it's okay to have those emotions, and it's so important to give yourself permission to have these emotions, because look what's happened throughout your whole life when you avoid those feelings. Nothing good has come out of it. Maybe you'll get temporary relief, but you deal with long-term consequences. So you have to outweigh it. You know, would you rather have temporary relief but long-term punishment and consequences, or would you rather have short-term discomfort and long-term relief and peace? There's also a subcategory of avoidance, which is avoiding situations that make you uncomfortable. So you avoid your feelings that make you uncomfortable. You may also notice you avoid situations that make you uncomfortable. So when you have anxiety, you try to avoid situations that cause your anxiety. You may avoid situations where, you know, there's vulnerability with others. You'll notice that you avoid a lot of those situations so you don't have to deal with all those uncomfortable feelings, or you don't have to deal with confrontation, or you don't have to deal with hurting someone or something of that sort. So it kind of goes along with the same thing with avoiding your feelings, is that you are trying to avoid a situation so you can either buy more time, or you don't have to deal with that situation altogether. You don't have to deal with those emotions and those uncomfortable feelings. There's also the factor we have to add in that you all may avoid situations because situations in your household led to really big punishment or consequences, and there was no, you know, maybe forgiveness, or there was no ability to make amends. It was always big explosions. So you try to avoid those at all costs. Really, it's a matter of now in adulthood learning how to deal with uncomfortable situations and accepting the consequences of no matter what happens. Because again, you're not that helpless child, you're an adult now. And so you can walk away from situations, you can, you know, learn how to communicate in those situations. It's not the same thing as in childhood when you depended on these people. You don't depend on the people around you. It's so important to have emotional support, but if you can't have healthy relationships with people around you, or the people are not willing to work with you, then you have to go and find other healthy relationships. You have to determine, you know, how much does this relationship in my life benefit me? How do I benefit them, and how do they benefit me? The next one, which is a big one, which I don't see people talk about enough, and that's always trying to do the right thing. And this happens especially if you grew up in a religious home, or just a home where there was a lot of shame, where they made you feel like you had to do the right thing, or you would be shamed and guilted. So when a situation comes up, you will get anxiety about like, what is the right thing? I don't know what the right thing to do is. And so you have a hard time making decisions or taking action or doing things because you get stuck on what is the right thing to do. And this especially happens if you grew up in environments where your parents would punish you if you didn't do the right thing. Like they had a specific thing in mind where they were like, where they wanted you to mind read and predict what the right thing to do was. And if you didn't do it, it was like you opened door number 3, and door number 3 was this big punishment. And the punishment could be staying in your room. It could be just getting shamed and talked down to. It could be made to feel guilty and like you're always wrong and bad. So really in adulthood, it's learning that there's no right and wrong. There's really not. It's extremely subjective. It's really a matter of understanding consequences to every one of your decisions. So when you're about to make a decision, think, okay, what are the consequences of this? And consequences are not just negative, they're also positive too. For instance, if you eat a salad, a positive consequence is that you will be healthier. You know, your body will get the right nutrients and vitamins and minerals. So think of it in that way, where when you make a decision, think, okay, so my friend's birthday party is next week, but I also have this big work event. You know, what are the consequences of me going to my friend's birthday party and missing the work event? And what are the consequences of me going to the work event and missing the birthday party? That's how you can think, okay, I understand these are the consequences and I accept the consequences, and then leaning into it and understanding that these are the consequences that you'll be dealing with, whether that's making someone upset or disappointing someone, and owning it and just be like, you know what, I know making this consequence will lead to maybe some disappointment, or maybe it will lead to me being fired, whatever it is, and I'm okay with it. This is what I will do in those situations. I will maybe try to make it up to my friend, or I have to go get another job, whatever it is. So don't think of it as I have to do the right thing. Think, okay, what are the consequences and what am I okay with? The next one is another avoidant tactic, which is you avoid being alone. So a lot of us will avoid being alone for many different reasons. Maybe in childhood, you dealt with being super alone, like you were in your room a lot, you didn't make a lot of friends, your parents didn't pay attention to you, so you dealt with a lot of loneliness. And you didn't have enough connection in childhood. Or maybe you felt really low about yourself, or you feel really low about yourself, and you avoid being alone because you're trying to avoid feeling those feelings. You may fear going through depression or being alone with your thoughts. So in order to deal with all of those scary scenarios, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna avoid being alone altogether. Being alone is too uncomfortable, there's too much going on. So the solution, the practical solution is don't be alone. So that means you will go from relationship to relationship, so that way you can receive that validation, and so you can avoid any of that discomfort. You may go to a lot of social events. You will mark your calendar with lots of things to do. You will do anything so that way you don't have to be alone with yourself. Really what you need to do is to cope with those big feelings and tackle, you know, this fear of being alone, whether that's, you know, giving your inner child what they needed when they were so alone, and you comforting that inner child so that way they don't feel so alone anymore and they know they have you. Or that's you dealing with all these negative thoughts and all this anxiety and this depression, and dealing with all of it and coping with it in healthier ways and tackling it so that way it's not prevalent in your life as much. You really need to take time to deliberately challenge yourself, because in reality you're burning yourself out by trying to avoid being alone so much. It's going to catch up to you. You know, these things, they can't be suppressed for long. They eventually come out in bigger ways, like we always talk about, could come out in just always constantly being in a funk, or having anger, or just being sad all the time, you know, actually going to the depression that you fear going into by not being able to tackle and deal with your depression in healthier ways, by through CBT, by, you know, feeling your feelings out, by doing all the things that you need to do to cope with all these sad feelings, or even with trying to avoid your anxieties, feeling those feelings, working through that anxiety, identifying why you're having this anxiety, learning how to use this big machine in your head, because our brain really is a machine that you want to learn how to use rather than trying to avoid, because you're stuck with it for the rest of your life. So if there's an option to be alone or to go out, and you really try to avoid being alone, challenge yourself and just let yourself be alone and figure out, you know, what's going on. You know, why are you having such a hard time being alone? Get to the root of it and then work your way up. The next one is self-sacrificing. Now in childhood, like I mentioned, you felt like you had to rid yourself in order to connect with your caregiver, your parent. And so that means not recognizing your own needs. That means overly self-sacrificing. That means taking care of your parent, soothing your parent, teaching your parent how to regulate their emotions. You know, you pretty much were the parent of them, and you were the one that took care of your caregiver, your parent. And so then you learn to overly sacrifice yourself in order to have connection. And not only that, but you go into people-pleasing tendencies to avoid your parent getting upset with you. And there's not only that, but self-sacrificing also can come from subliminal messaging. You know, it doesn't have to be outright, you know, obvious things. It can also be that they made you feel guilty for thinking about yourself, especially in religious homes. You know, they place a lot of guilt and shame if you ever do think about yourself first, or you take care of yourself first. You always have to give, you have to give to others, help the needy. And so there's this constant shame or this negative feeling of, I can't think about myself, I always have to put other people first. You know, I'm not allowed to have boundaries, I'm not allowed to give myself things, I always have to give it to other people, or I need other people to like me, so I'm going to take stuff away from me and give it to them, so that way I always have that connection. Really, it comes down to, in adulthood, to get unstuck, is to learn boundaries and to learn, you know, when is it okay for you to give, and when is it okay for you, or when do you need rather to take or to give to yourself. And that really comes down to a question of, if I did this, how would it make me feel? How would it affect me by doing this thing? Would it be putting me in a negative situation? Do I genuinely not want to do it? And if I did it, it would cause resentment. Really identifying, being aware of yourself and what you can give and what you need to give to yourself can help so you break that pattern of overly sacrificing yourself, and really breaking the guilt and giving yourself permission of, it's okay for me to be selfish. Selfish is not a bad thing. It's only bad when it's overly done. It's when you do it too much. But selfishness in itself, it's not a bad thing. We need to be selfish in order to survive. If you weren't a little bit selfish, you would be with your ancestors. And the last one, that's a major one, is you don't allow yourself to be proud of yourself. So the biggest way that I teach people and my clients how to validate themselves is to be proud of themselves, value who they are, value the things that they do, you know, giving themselves credit when they do something, even if it's something as simple as, you know, making their bed and they really struggle with making their bed, you know, determining their difficulty level and giving themselves credit and validation. It's so important. But so many people struggle with this, and it makes them feel very uncomfortable doing this. And that is because in a lot of our homes, we were brought up to believe that it's shameful or it's wrong to give ourselves credit. It's like, no, you can't do that. You can't validate yourself. That's conceited. That's cocky. That's, you know, no one will like you if you do that. You can have this resistance to being proud of yourself. You'll be like, oh, that feels yucky. Like, it feels like I shouldn't do that. And that's where that shame comes in. If you feel like a yucky disgust feeling, that's shame. And so you feel like you're not supposed to do it because it's so ingrained in your head. But really, you have to come to an understanding that you were taught wrong to feel shame for validating yourself. There's a difference between bragging and like looking for other people's validation of like, oh, I did this and I have this many votes and like blah blah. Like, there's a difference between that, where people kind of get a bad taste in their mouth, versus you going to yourself and saying, I accomplished this, like I got out of this bad situation, or I accomplished this, and I made this, I got married, or I did this thing, and I feel good about myself that I did this, and or I'm so proud of myself because I love who I've become in these situations, or I love the character I am, or I love these traits about myself. It's okay for you to like yourself and love yourself and be proud of the things that you have that make you unique. It's actually mandatory in order for you to stop seeking validation from other people rather than yourself. Because think about it, what really is the difference if you get it from someone else? If someone else is like, oh, you know, you're so caring, like that's so awesome, you're so caring, like what's the difference between that versus when you tell it to yourself? There's nothing. It's just the person who's doing it, and you feel more comfortable hearing it from someone else rather than hearing it from yourself, because it takes out that shame factor, or it takes out you having a relationship with yourself, or you holding yourself accountable in any sort of way, you being the one that's saying it. You know, there's this feeling of like, oh, it doesn't feel as good. No, you need to be your own best friend, where you really value what you have to say and you trust in yourself and you like yourself. So what do you guys think? Leave it all in the comments below, and please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share with someone that you think may need it. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye guys. I'm feeling very Beetlejuicy today. Got the Beetlejuice colors. But I'm not saying Beetlejuice 3 times because I do not want them coming. Is my hair bothering me? I see like weirdness. It's fine, you just gotta deal, you know. You get what you get, you don't get upset, you know.